All right, welcome everybody. We're just making sure everyone has the opportunity to get in, and we will get started shortly. We are recording this first half of the session for anyone who's unable to come. So at this time, you may keep your cameras on or off. We do ask that you remain muted for this first session here. Okay. All right, so we'll get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Bruno. I'm the Interim Assistant Director of Graduate Career Services. I'm joined here with Suzanne Grossman, who's the Deputy Director of Career Services here at Marxe. I'd like to welcome you all to our panel today for transitioning into higher education. I'm so excited to be putting this on because not only am I introducing some great colleagues, also some great classmates of mine. So I'm a little selfish today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nourine Bhimani, who is the, let me pull up your title here, who's the Assistant Director and Career Coach at NYU SPS Wasserman Center for Career Development. We also have Christine Ryan, who is the Assistant Director of Admissions and Marketing for the NYU Law Institute of Executive Education, and Peri Sharpe, who's an ASAP Career Specialist at New York City College of Technology, City Tech. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So I'll start with Nourine. Nourine, if you can just introduce yourself quickly to the group, tell us about the program that you did here at Marxe, what your previous career was before higher education, and how'd you get to where you are now?
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to meet you all. And thank you, Suzanne and Samantha, for inviting me to this roundtable. As Samantha mentioned, I am the Assistant Director Career Coach with the New York University's School of Professional Studies. I graduated from Marxe School in May 2020 with a Master of Public Administration. I came to United States in fall 2016 from India with a multifunction experience of like close to 6 years, mainly into nonprofits and banking and financial institutions. I worked mainly into marketing communications and event management roles. But along with this, I was and am an active volunteer. I'm associated with a faith-based community professional network. So in India, through this organization, I would conduct career counseling workshops for high school students and that helping them assess their interest and develop well-aligned career paths. I mainly worked with students from marginalized communities. So when I had a chance to restart my career in the United States, I took some time to self-reflect and carve out options, keeping in mind that all that I've done so far. In United States, prior working in higher ed, I have good experience working with the New York City public school system through New York City Department of Education. But I just felt that my interest more aligns on the higher ed side, and here I am.
Great, thanks for joining us. And I'll pass it off to Christine.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and good to meet you. So my name is Christine Ryan. As Sam mentioned, I'm now at NYU in an admissions and marketing role for a small team at the law school. But prior to that, I was working in advertising sales at A&E television networks. That was my undergrad background and what I saw myself doing at the time. But about 2 years into that role, I realized that I just was not passionate about that and I didn't want to do it long term. I liked my team, I liked the company quite a bit, but I didn't see myself doing that for decades and decades. So I did some reflection, and as Nourine mentioned, I actually started volunteering as well with a college prep program through New York Cares. So I was helping undergrads with their college applications, and I found that I absolutely loved it. I thought, if I can make this sort of thing my full-time job, I want to do that. So I started to look into job postings that were of interest to me, and I realized that a lot of them were calling for applicants with a higher ed master's degree. And so that led me to Baruch. So after a year as a student at Baruch, I started to do lots of informational meetings. I met with Suzanne Grossman in her office, and really started to network. And through all of those networking meetings, informational meetings, I eventually was connected to my now manager at NYU. And that's how I got here, but I can go into the specifics more later in the breakout.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christine. And actually, really funny story. Christine's office at A&E used to be right across the campus where I used to work. And so we would run into each other like sometimes before classes. So that was always fun to like see each other running to and from meetings too. And then finally, Peri, please share.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's so good to see some of you again and meet some of you. So my name is Peri Sharpe, and right now I'm both the ASAP and the ACE career specialist starting this year at City Tech. And I transitioned from being a therapist. So my first graduate degree was back from in San Francisco. I went to New College of California, and I got a master's degree in clinical psych. And I was a therapist for many years, working first in San Francisco with domestic abuse survivors. And then I'm part Turkish, so I moved to Istanbul, Turkey for about 10, 15 years, where I did private practice, and I worked a lot with couples, especially couples of mixed cultural couples, because I did, therapy in Turkish and English. And I ended up working with a lot of college age students because the Turkish school system is extremely difficult. So you have lots of issues with college age students due to the pressure. And then about 5 years ago, I decided to move back to New York, where I had spent my teenage years. And coming back here, I had to make a decision. I wasn't licensed here. Either I was going to continue with my education and go back and get more schooling after having been a therapist for 25 years. And I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something different. And I don't have many other interests. I like art, I like education, I like therapy. That's pretty much it. So when I was thinking, what should I kind of concentrate on, it was higher ed. I mean, the family story goes that when they asked me when I was a kid what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said a student, because I love school. I love going to school. I love classes. I love students. So I decided to start applying for positions, thinking that my experience as a therapist would help in being an advisor, but I was getting nowhere. It was months and months of applying to mainly CUNY positions when I went to an art exhibition and met someone that worked at FIT, and he said, you should do the Master's in Higher Education Administration at Baruch. And I didn't even know such a master's degree existed. It was the first time I was hearing about it. So I looked into it and I started the program. And within a few months, I had a professor email us about a college assistant position in this office with City Tech and ASAP. And I had already written a paper on ASAP because I loved the idea of ASAP and the support services so much. So I applied and I started working as a college assistant in this office. And then a few months later, the career specialist left and I was made interim career specialist. And then 6 months later, I was hired. And I've been here 3 years as the career specialist. And I have a caseload of about 1,200 students that I'm responsible every semester for seeing in either a one-on-one or a workshop in some kind of context. But yep, from therapy to now a career specialist. That's my trajectory.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I actually just want to throw a really quick, plug to Marxe. I guess, is there one class or one like project or assignment that the three of you kind of hold like kind of special to kind of that's helped you in your current positions now, whether it was, related to higher ed or not? Because Nourine, I know you were in the MPA program, and then Christine and Peri, we actually had the opportunity to take electives outside the higher ed program too. And and anyone can go first.
I can jump in. My favorite course was actually an elective, educational policy. It didn't necessarily inform my current role, but it led me to realize that I'm really interested in that perhaps down the road. And also, I'm not just saying this because I see Professor Spalter on the call, but the administrative services course I really enjoyed, because that's when you really, especially for career changers who didn't really have a good understanding of all of the different offices and disciplines within higher ed, that's where you really get to learn about those things and you can start to see where you fit in. So there was a project where we all had to pick a vice presidency within a college, and I picked VP of enrollment management because I thought I might be interested in admissions, and through that project I learned that that was indeed the case. So favorite course, and then favorite / informed my current role.
And I'll second that. I mean, I was going to say, because like Christine said, when you are just entering higher ed, there's so many roles and it's so kind of confusing knowing who does what in one office. That class was so valuable in kind of just breaking down everything and giving me an insight of what's possible. Where can you work if you want to do what? So yes, definitely that class. And because I give about 33 workshops a semester, which is a huge amount of workshops, I loved that crazy presentation we had to do without the words. What was it called in Rachel's class? Oh my God, Rishma, you know the name of that. Was it like a Pikachu, or you know what I'm talking about? It's giving a presentation without using words, where you have to use images and you have to know what you're talking about because you have no notes. So doing that helped me a lot, kind of be spontaneous in workshops.
I think for me, I took 2 classes with Professor Ryan Smith. He's my very favorite. I think classes with him have been extremely thought-provoking and gave me a very good flavor of understanding the cultural aspect of being in a workplace. So I think there was a course that I took with him, which was managing cultural diversity at workplace. And he really came up with such great examples. He also included higher ed. So I think that really excited me a lot. And after that class, I took a class, Issues in Higher Ed. It is again an elective, which MPA curriculum allows you to do. And I was so fascinated by both of these courses. It was like it opened a whole new area of opportunity for me. I conducted some informational interviews with both the professors to understand some of the roles that higher ed offers and how my experience can align with those roles. And I think all that happened only when I took these 2 courses. And lastly, I would say I also had a very good conversation with Marnie Smith, who was with the Career Services team. I owe my success to her as a professional. So she was the one who introduced, though it's not a course or a class at Baruch, but she spent a lot of time with me, helping me navigate what is it that can align with me, with my interest. And I think all these things helped me to identify what I should be doing next.
Great. Well, I know that was a plug for Marxe and for Marxe Career Services, and I'm not going to pass up on the opportunity for that ever. But all right, that's great. So another question I wanted to pose to you: what were the factors that helped you decide to transfer specifically to the departments you're in? So Nourine and Peri, know you're in career advising. Peri, you kind of balance career advising and academic programming. And Christine, you're in admissions. So what were those factors? And were there any other departments or industries that you considered in your transition?
I can go first. I think given my previous experience and interest, I was keen in working in social impact space, but being very focused that should be through education. So I was very sure about these 2 spaces. That was a boundary with which I wanted to set myself up as a professional. I started with public office. So I started working with New York City Department of Education. However, after working some time over there, I realized that the impact of my work is not very direct or immediate. And I would want to see that. And I could do that moving to higher education. And if I joined higher education, I realized that I could align with the career services department because career education has been my strength. I've done this before in a different country with a different population, but the core remains the same. So I think it was the impact, it was the, for lack of good term, desperation to see the impact of my work immediate and direct. I moved to higher ed.
Yeah, I think mine was kind of like a happy happenstance, right? So when I was in this office, I did not have intentions of being a career specialist. And when I started working as a college assistant, I was still applying to lots of other positions as academic advisor and just many different roles. And then 3 roles opened up in this office, and the director then said, Peri, I can see you in all 3, apply to all 3. So one was recruitment, one was like a math start, and one was a career specialist. But she said, I think you'll enjoy career specialist the most because it's the most kind of diverse on topics and issues and that immediate kind of connection with students. And yeah, I ended up doing that and really loving kind of how much you could bring into career services, right? Everything is in there. Diversity issues, access, first generation. I was a first generation college student, so to me it was very important. What I always consider kind of getting out of survival mentality when it comes to thinking about career and how do we assist students to the flourishing mentality. Because when I was in college, I had a survivor mentality. I wanted to be a photographer, but I was like, oh no, I have a single immigrant mom. I need to pick something wise. I can't be an artist. So I talk about these things a lot with students. So I didn't really consider anything after that.
I definitely didn't consider any other industries aside from higher ed. When I left A&E, I knew that I was going to be pursuing higher ed for the long term. I just felt drawn to it. I think all of us are sort of saying the same thing here, which is interesting and really nice. But I've also always loved school. I love the atmosphere. I love being around students and professors and being a student and all of that. So it's just something I've always really loved. And I'm also a first gen college student. I think we all are as well, which is great. And so I wanted to be a part of helping the next generation, if possible, if I'm lucky enough to do that in a future role. So that's really what drew me to the industry. But in terms of the specific part of higher ed, I think I was drawn to admissions because I felt that I had transferable skills from my sales role at A&E. There is an element of sales and marketing associated with admissions. And so it felt like a good transition for me and a good foot in the door to get into higher ed. And it has been working out well, and I do enjoy it and see myself doing admissions long term, but I'd also give advice to you all to not limit yourselves. I'm sure you have many transferable skills. You don't necessarily have to pick the role in higher ed that you think makes the most sense for your resume. You can pursue whatever you'd like. So that's my story and a little piece of advice.
Oh my gosh, you're getting ahead of us, Christine. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. But before we kind of go into that piece of advice, I guess like what was the biggest challenge that you all faced like during the transition that you all went through? How did you overcome it? But also, is it something that you're still working on? Is it a process that you're still kind of in right now?
So challenges, I can think of many, but I am going to talk of 2 in the event of time, and also having our the 2 speakers on this. So the first is the whole perception of working in higher education. More often you find internal and external people perceive being in higher ed professional is it's an easy job, laid back, 9 to 5, which is not true at all. at all. This is hard work. This is really tough. But I think the whole perception is challenging, not only because people who don't work in higher ed have this, but sometimes you meet people in higher ed also who look at it in that way, and that makes getting the work done hard, or make getting anything done difficult. Having said that, the second challenge is more personal to me. I feel that being an immigrant, the whole higher education system is extremely new to me. I was brought up in a very different place with a very different education setup. So adjusting more culturally is an ongoing process for me. And I'm unlearning a lot. That is my way to overcome this, is I'm really unlearning a lot. Whatever I've been told, heard, seen, I'm trying to be more aware. I take a pause every time and try to think through things. And I think that cultural piece is going to be an ongoing thing for me. And these are my two challenges, I feel.
I can follow that up. I think coming from a therapy background, what's still a challenge, and I'm always working on, is how to balance knowing that. So let's say I'm working with a student, and they still don't make their resume, and you can be like, why aren't you making a resume? I told you to make your resume. But there's that moment when you hear the overwhelmingness of it in their voice. And when you go, and I usually do that, I go, I sense that you're overwhelmed by this. And then they're like, Peri, I'm so scared to make a resume. I have no experience, So I work in a very kind of that direction because I have a therapy background, because I know these internal obstacles really get in the way of students making use and help seeking in college, especially immigrant students. Because me also coming from a different culture, even the idea of networking, right? In Turkish culture, you're supposed to be humble. You're not going around bragging about what you do, because that, then you're not a good human being. But then I have to say, when they're reluctant to network, I have to say, oh, is it because you've been kind of brought up? So I work very much in that way, but I also know I have 1,200 students, and this is higher ed. So how to balance kind of that individualized work that I'm trained to do, because I know it's so important, but also see as many students as I can. So learning to balance that is still an ongoing issue for me. But I think it's important. I think it's very important to get to the individualized work, as well as the group work and the teaching and the education part of it. But that's what I struggle with.
I thought of the struggle while the other panelists were speaking. During the initial job application process, when I was first making the transition from my previous job into my current job, I realized that I was definitely needing to sell myself a bit more, because I was a career changer. And I know that is an element of every job application and interview process. You need to, be confident and articulate how your skills fit in. But I felt a little bit insecure at first because I didn't quite have all of the required experience when I was first applying to roles. So my advice would just be to remain confident despite that. And you likely do have many of the skills that are needed. Exactly, Kristen. And that's something that I continue to work on now. Don't fall victim to imposter syndrome. And then secondly, in terms of the work itself, my previous job had elements of surprise in it, but I pretty much knew what was expected of me day to day. And every day at around 4:30, I had an exact deliverable that I needed to get done. And that was that. Stuff would come up, but I knew what my role was. And if I had to get that done. In higher ed, things will come at you fast. You have to adapt. You might make your to-do list like I've done this morning. Okay, I'm going to get XYZ done. And by the end of the day, you find you haven't completed it because other things have come up. So just keep that in mind, and try to adapt or unlearn whatever work process you had before and make sure it fits with your new role, because it is a little bit hectic at times. We wear a lot of hats in higher ed.
We certainly do. Like Nourine, I really thank you for bringing up the whole idea of unlearning and relearning, because yes, we get I think we all do a sense of that professionally and personally, and especially as we kind of go into this hybrid world, of now having gone through the initial pandemic of 2020 and still living in it. There's a lot that we're unlearning, through, just being a professional, whatnot. So just the last question I have before we go into our breakout rooms is, what's a piece of advice that you all wish that you had, whether it was prior to your transition or during your transition? I know you talked about it a little bit just now, and feel free to expand on that as well.
I think for me, it would be, I think I did have kind of a myth about higher education. I mean, just having grown up, loving being a student, like that vision of what a school is, students running with their papers falling out of their arms in hallways. You know what I mean? Like that vision of higher ed. And I wish I knew it wasn't like that, that it's really about loving working with students. That's what gets you through everything. And higher ed is a very slow moving institution. And we hear about that while we're, studying, but it's a very slow move. So if you're like a fast person like I am, kind of like you want things to happen and change fast, no, you just have to slow it down. You have to be patient. You have to do your work, know that things that you sow now will change maybe in 5 years, 10 years, maybe you won't see it. But I think that's a good thing knowing going in.
I would expand on what Christine mentioned, and in higher ed, you wear multiple hats. Sometimes it's, you might have a to-do list right at the start of the day, and at the end of the day, you have not even done one thing, but simultaneously you have achieved a lot of other things which are not on the list. So having said that, I feel that I think more information on distinction of leadership roles and functional roles would have been more fruitful to me. Is if I look at my career trajectory, if I had more information about the distinction of these two. The leadership arm in the higher ed industry requires a whole different kind of qualifications and skill set as compared to the functional roles in the industry. To give you an example, that would be probably a dean versus a director of admissions or career services, right? And because they require different kind of skill set, and it is higher ed, it is traditional industry, so the qualifications are very different, and having an understanding of that at the start would have given me more clarity, and that would have helped me move a little faster than I am in my career trajectory right now.
Yeah, expanding off of that also, I think I made some assumptions about what higher ed was going to be like, in that I thought some elements of it would be more similar to a corporate role, and it's not. It's an entirely different structure in place within my team, and then within how a university operates versus how a large private corporation operates. So, for example, something that's come up more recently is that in my current role, we don't do formal performance reviews. I'm not sure if that's specific to the unit I'm working in or the team or what have you, but that's something that I thought would be standardized across every position in any industry, but maybe it is not. And maybe that's something I should have asked about in the interview process. So just do your research, ask questions, and higher ed might be a little bit different than you were expecting. So just be mindful of that.
Well, thank you all for imparting your wisdom. This concludes the first part of our panel. If everyone could, give me a round of applause, whether it's on screen or using the emojis, please thank our panelists here. I'm going to stop the recording as we get ready to transition to the breakout rooms.